there's not a guy sitting on Wall Street right now who knows what a bad market looks like. We've been in a 45-year bull market. An 81 PE was 6. Interest rates were 16 or 17, and the boomers hit the market with their wives, so the demographics were phenomenal. And the valuations, which should not trend, compounded 4% a year for 4 decades. When that reverses, duck.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate. What's going on, guys? Today I've got an amazing episode with Dave Collum. Dave is a professor of chemistry at Cornell University, and he writes a absolute mammoth document at the end of every year. Calls it the Year in Review. The 2024 Year in Review is almost 250 pages, and it dives into all the things that Dave saw this year, what he's thinking, and where he thinks the world is going. In this conversation alone, we talk about Bitcoin, gold, stock valuations, frontier justice, cancel culture. We talk about Western Spring, Elon Musk, government spending, healthcare administrations. We talk about the merits of price gouging, the RFK's true plan, the Baltimore Bridge, creative destruction, portfolio breakdown, and much more. This covered as much content as I have covered in 2 hours in a very long time. I'm excited for you to listen to the conversation, and I promise you that if you listen to the whole thing, you're going to come away thinking more independently, more critically, and you're going to have a lot more questions than you do answers, which is the whole point of consuming great content on the internet. So here's my latest conversation with Dave Collum. All right, Dave, I thought a great place to start this conversation is everyone is just super excited. They're exuberant. There's euphoria in the market when it comes to stocks and various asset prices. And I think that the folks who've been around for a while, they say, wait a minute, a market crash is around the corner. There's no way that PE multiples can be this high. Everyone is way too exuberant. The Mag 7 is overvalued. A crash is coming. But the question I have is, do you think that the Federal Reserve broke the market and has outlawed or banned these market downturns and recessions?
Well, I think they broke the market, but I don't think they've outlawed recessions and equity corrections. So yeah, they broke the market. Here, I've been thinking a lot about this. The fact that private equity can rape and pillage means monetary policy is too loose. That it's too loose because that should not be profitable. Right?
Explain.
Destroying companies should not. Well, so they buy a company, they sell off assets, they take on huge debt, they pay themselves huge bonuses, and they sell off the company with a 47% probability those companies go bankrupt. That's in another book for you. We always swap books, don't we? Next book for you is The Plunderers by Gretchen Morgenson and Josh Roscher. I'm sure you've read it. I can see you smirking. So when it's profitable to destroy companies, the money's too loose. When my dad when I was young, he went into a new business. He was a contractor. He went into some subset of that. I asked him why, and he said, "You mean besides I can make money?" I said, "Yeah, why that one?" He said, "Because it's got a big capital outlay, and anyone who has the quantity of capital needed to do this business, I can compete with. What I can't do is compete with a guy who can get in on a dime, undercut my prices, put us both out of business." So limited access to capital is a moat for good businessmen. And private equity guys should be hung from their chads. I now call them chads in election season, hung by their chads until dead. And some private equity guy called me. You get spam calls
all the time.
Want to sell you shit
all the time.
Okay, so I've now taken answering an unknown number. I say, My answer is, I pick up the phone. Instead of saying hello, I say, if you're trying to sell me an investment product, I'm going to hunt you down like a mad dog. And then
is that legal?
Some private equity guy. I don't know. You mean hunting him down? Yeah, no. The other thing I'm thinking of switching over to, we're going to have a lot of phone sex.
You think so?
I've thought about that. I have wanted to get a call from someone and start having phone sex with them. Say, can I fondle myself while we talk? And just take it from there.
Are you hoping it's a private equity guy?
Well, if it is, the problem is they'll like it. All
right. What about stocks? Hold on. Let's talk about the stocks though, right? Because the private equity, they're doing this. You think that capital is too cheap while they're doing or able to do this. Obviously, cheap capital pushes stock prices higher. One of the things that I find interesting is PE ratios are definitely up. I think that I saw we are somewhere in the ballpark of 28, I think. And
I don't buy those numbers at all.
Okay.
I don't buy those numbers at all.
Explain that in 1 second. But the thing that I also saw is that the free cash flow margin for the largest publicly traded companies in the US is up like 500% since 1970. So it's been increasing. The businesses have been getting better, more capital efficient, that they're kind of more attractive from the way that they operate, the free cash flow that they're able to drive. The question, I guess, is how do you start to look at, hey, these businesses are better than they used to be, but the multiples are up? Like the historical comparison, to me, the historical comparisons become harder when you have better businesses today than you did then.
I don't think they're better businesses. Let's start with Facebook. If Facebook died today, who cares?
True, but first of all, I think a lot of people would care.
How many billion is that?
I think a lot of people would care. But more importantly is they're driving a lot of profit, and they do it in a more capital efficient way.
There's a great plot that gets mispresented. There's a plot that shows capital intensive businesses and how they perform in the markets, and capital unintensive businesses and how they perform in the market. And as you just said, the capital unintensive businesses have soared. The capital intensive businesses have done nothing. What that means is the guys who are blocking and tackling and creating wealth, aka Robert Gordon, as we talk about every podcast, are getting the crap kicked out of them because it's very expensive to actually create wealth. The capital unintensive businesses where you're slopping pixels around, you're slopping money around, you're slopping stuff around that really creates no wealth whatsoever. And maybe my definition of wealth is wrong, but the fact of the matter is there anyone listening to this podcast who really is enjoying the fact that they have to always reset their password, always log in, and always have to do everything and download a fucking app every fucking time you want to do something, and it tells you your password's not the right password, and you know it's your right password, and then you go to do something. I tried to renew my passport, to 11 attempts to upload the photo, and I find guys, I go down to CVS, I got to take it there. They give me a photo, and then I upload it successful, and then I still can't get to the finish, and my IT guy walks in, and I'm having to figure out why my printer is printing double side when the box is checked as print single side. He doesn't know, but he defaults it, everything, and gets rid of it, right? So this is the annoying world we live in. So then I said, well, by the way, I can't get my passport. He says, I got mine in a week. And I boot it up and I'm doing it. And he starts doing his phone thing. He says, you're not at a government website.
You're uploading somewhere else.
Now, I don't think, I want to find a person who did that and beat him with a bag of oranges. I want to get even with that guy. I want frontier justice to come back.
All right. So this is a big theme.
I'm ready to hit a bell tower.
This is a big theme. You do a year in review every year. I enjoy reading it. I know many other people enjoy reading it. This, just to for those that are watching, is only part one. This is a fat one. I thought I was going to run out of ink in the printer if I printed the whole damn thing. If we go into that year in review, at one point you talk about the island of snakes, I think it is, right? There's a bunch of snakes on an island. Snake Island.
Snake Island. Yeah.
And you want to take a bunch of people who have done really bad things to society and put them there and say, we'll see you later.
Right.
Explain frontier justice and why you think bringing that back potentially could have a positive impact.
Well, so I've been thinking about this. We were watching a TV show from 1720 Hudson Bay. The show was not made then. That's what it was about. And some guy was a total dick. And I realized this is not realistic because in 1720, some outpost in Hudson Bay, if a guy's a dick, someone's going to take him out. He's going to turn the corner. No one's going to be looking, and he's going to get clubbed over the head. Right? And so you have to learn how to not piss off people or you did not survive. So that's the social animal. We don't have that consequence anymore. And so look at the squatter story, right? You can't get rid of the squatters. What I would like to do is go into the squatters with the Louisville Slugger and smack them a few times and say, if I ever see you in this neighborhood, you are going to die. That's what I want to do at this point. I've just had enough of this kind of bullshit. If Mershon tries to throw Trump in jail, dox the guy, right? Post his fucking address. I've just had enough of this stuff. You can't. I was listening to the sentencing. My guess is they won't sentence him to anything, so that'll come to nothing. But I'm growing so tired. I was thinking about, I got canceled in 2020. I was thinking about that coming into work today for some reason. And what I posted was a post to QTR where I defended the police. I said, look, I don't know why the guy was in that. It was a war zone. And he shouldn't have been there. He's an old man. It's the guy who got pushed over in Buffalo.
I remember.
And I said,
like the town square.
Yeah, right. And it says it's kind of self-inflicted when you're poking riot police. And he actually turns out he was skimming their equipment. He had been a pain in the ass all week, and it turns out he was a grifter. But I didn't know that at the time. I just saw an old guy being stupid, and I said it's kind of self-inflicted. And next thing I know, the entire fucking Cornell campus wants to get me fired. Now, I just shut up. I had trustees calling me, chatting with me. David Einhorn reached out. We spent hours on the phone. My brother-in-law was a trustee. We spent hours on the phone. And so I had big backers, but it was an unpleasant experience. The next time I'll come out swinging. The next time I'm going to write an op-ed and say, you fucking pussies, you spent $70,000 to pay my fucking salary, and this is all you got, right? So
do you think
so,
that?
So I'm kind of looking for fights now.
Do you think that public discourse has changed? Obviously, with Trump winning the popular vote, there's been a kind of a vibe shift in America. But I also think that
who used that phrase? Someone invented that shit. Who invented that phrase?
Vibe shift? I don't know, but it's perfect.
No, there was one person who came up with it. It was a prominent person. I remember thinking that's a good way to describe it.
Yeah, I think it's perfect. So what I do think, though, is America's also fed up with the cancel culture for the most part. Yes. Right. When you see the hit piece, people don't even read it anymore. They're like, shut up. Right. When you see someone trying to go and get somebody canceled, people are like, shut up. Except I do think one of the risks are the left extreme has been the cancelers for a while. But now there seems to be a faction of the right that is starting to use some of the same thing. And so I wonder how much of cancel culture is not left or right, but just who's in power.
Well, that's an interesting point. That really isn't it. In fact, one of the things I've labored over is when Trump gets into power officially, and he's got his A team, which I really like the looks of, including people who others are appalled by, like Rubio, right? I totally understand why Rubio is not a popular pick. What I've encouraged people to consider, and this is in part 2, by the way, is assume that Trump and his inner circle vetted Rubio pretty carefully and ask the question, why did he pick Rubio, right? Because he's not obvious. And I think my guess is if I had to write a plot, I'd say, look, this is what we're going to do. This is what we expect out of you. If you can't do it, I'm going to fire you in a heartbeat. Don't take the job if you can't do it. What do you say? And Rubio's a chameleon probably, right? So he said, yeah, I can do that. So the question is, do I want to see Trump go out there and move the country forward? And do I want to see him exact some revenge? And I think the constructive thing is to move the country forward. But I've had a lot of podcast hosts who, when I ask them, they say, we've got to clean up some of the mess that was created, though. We can't just let this go. And so, as you read in there, my 23andMe traced me back to an inbred tribe in the Neander Valley, which means I'm a Neanderthal. And so I would love to see some of these douchebags get what's coming, but it will be distracting. And if he really wants to get something done, he's going to have to stay focused.
All right. Before we get
so I'm torn.
Yeah. Before we get into new administration and things that they're going to do, let's cover a couple things on the economy first. Gold outperformed the S&P. I think it's the first time in history where gold and the S&P are both up more than 25%. And I think that there's a lot of people who look and say the S&P performance over the last 2 years is unsustainable. How do you reckon with gold and the S&P doing so well, gold outperforming the S&P, and then 2 straight years of 20-25% performance of S&P?
Well, if you go back to the Buffett's 1999 Fortune article, he lays out in luridly clear detail. I've read it probably 6 times. And he says what dictates the performance of the markets in a long term is what is happening to the long interest rates. And he says, it's not about GDP. It's not about wars. It's not about pandemics. By the way, in 2009, I said pandemics and wars don't have an effect on markets. Boy, that was kind of foreshadowing, wasn't it? And he says it's about the direction of interest rates, long-term rates. And he said from 1967 to 81, when the markets were inflation corrected, went down 75%, which in 75% is bad. 14 years is worse. Right? 14 years is a third of your investment life. And so if you spend 14 years climbing down into the valley of death, you've just burned a lot of time. Duration is what you guys like to call it. And then he said the GDP during that period was better than the GDP from 81 to 99. But from 81 to 99, interest rates went from way the fuck up there to down. And he says that's why the markets did well. So what happened? Well, from 81 to the present, interest rates went from, or recent years, interest rates went from 17 to 0. It's almost as though they were smart enough to know. They said, we've got 17%. We can squeeze 4 decades of gains if we bleed these 17% down to 0. Almost like they knew what Buffett was saying. I doubt they did, but almost like they did. And now we're at the bottom. Now, nitwits on Wall Street, which I repeat myself, like to say that low interest rates are bullish because you say, well, if you can't get it in the bonds, you got to buy the stocks, right? That sort of thing. No, low interest rates are bearish unless you got the attention span of a fruit fly. Because now you're at the end of the rope. You've run out of slack. You now have one direction. So in a secular investing world, low interest rates are the game's over now. And if we have turned the corner in these very long wavelength credit cycles, it's not necessarily going to go to 17 again, but it might, given all the debt and everything. If we've turned the corner, as a lot of smart guys think, we're looking at a very bad couple of decades for equities. And you can say is they're not going to correct. What I like to ask people rhetorically is so I think we're 200% over fair value, historical average value. And I can show you 25 metrics that sort of support that. The simplest one is to take the case Schiller. 1880 to 2025. If you set as a baseline the average from 1880 to 1990, it just channels, just like channeling stocks.com, right? And it averages around 12. When it was cheap in 81, it was 6. Good place to start a bull market. In fact, I don't think we needed Reagan. It was going to start no matter who got elected. And so that sets your baseline at 12. It's 38 now. Right? So what happens if we regress back to the mean? We got to drop 70%. Now, people say, oh, that would never happen, right? Okay, to those who say that, I'll ask the following question. Name for me an asset class that got way overvalued that didn't find its way back to cheap. They don't exist. It's a truism. They can't exist. It might take a while.
How long does it stay, quote unquote, overvalued until you say it's a new regime? Is that a 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? Like what is
nothing here? So I also, as you know, I went through the consequence of being overvalued. So valuation, let's say any valuation metric is the price divided by something it ought to track. And what's really critical, they're both inflation sensitive. Mm-hmm. So inflation doesn't get you out of overvaluation at all. So you inflate the price, you inflate the earnings, they both track inflation. Therefore, we could be 200% over fair value. Fair values should be historical average value. And you can inflate your ass off and you're still 200% over average value. It doesn't get you out of that mess. So if you have a stock like the example I really like was when we came out of the .com, Buffett said that he actually regretted hanging on to Coca-Cola. We know how much he loves that stock. And the reason is because at the end of the 90s, Coke got up to around a PE of 50. Now, Coke at a PE of 50 means it has a 2% cash flow. And he could get 5.5% out of a 10-year bond. Why would you own Coke at 2% cash flow when a bond will give you 5.5%? You say, well, the price might go up. Yeah, and then the price will go back down. You say, okay, let's say Coke doubles its earnings. Pomp, in the next 20 years, what are the odds Coke's going to double its earnings? Zero, right? Zero.
Why? Why zero?
It's basically a royalty trust, right? Coke's going to double it could double its earnings by acquisition, but that's not legit doubling earnings because acquisitions cost money.
Mm-hmm.
So you're just expanding the size of the footprint. You're not actually doubling your earnings. That's WorldCom did that. How'd that work out for investors, right? So let's say they double their earnings. Now they're priced. So that's almost impossible to imagine. Buffett should have known this is what he said. Now they would be priced to return 4%. Right? You can't get out of that. Your overvaluation is a dead end. So if you own a company that has a PE of 100 and you somehow think you're going to grow your way out, so your price to return 1%, you say, well, I'm going to double the earnings because it's a growth company. It's bullshit.com, whatever. So you double your earnings, you're now priced to return 2%. And if you say, well, I'll double them again, well, it's priced to return 4%. Double them again, priced to return 8%. How long is the market going to wait for it to return 8%? Not long.
What's interesting is there's this chart that just came out of Uber's operating profit. And, for years, they're heavy losses. The losses start to subside. They get to break even. And then the chart just continues. And there's just very methodical growth. And now they're profitable from an operating profit metric. What's interesting to me about that is, and I tweeted this saying, this is a classic playbook from a venture capital standpoint. That's what the venture capitalists want to see, right? Is they want to fund tons of losses for years and years, and then eventually you flip it, it becomes profitable, and then it prints money, they made a bunch of money, they're happy, et cetera. We talked about private equity investors earlier. The tech industry has now been doing this for decades, but really in the last, call it 15 or 20 years, there has been substantial amount of capital that's been put into that market. These companies are starting to come public over the last 5 years or so. There's been a lot of critics who have come out and said, hey, I actually don't like these companies, right? We think that these companies are bad businesses. They're just surviving because of the venture capital. They're overvalued. Name your critique that people have thrown at them. How do you think about those types of companies, which definitely fall in that growth category? Some of them do seem to be, reaching a point now, Palantir, Uber, et cetera, where they're becoming attractive businesses.
Oh, Palantir is such a hot button. I'm staying off that one. There is no question there are companies who are going to scrape up a lot of profits. Again, back to the Buffett article. He says, when you take the market, I don't know how to pick the Palantirs. I don't know how to pick the Ubers, right? By example, how many companies exist that still call themselves .com? You say, I invest in Amazon. You say, I don't say Amazon.com. It has a .com on the end because that's their website. How many companies are still .coms? The answer is none, right? And there were a ton of them who went to shit. And so you can focus on Amazon and say, oh, they did really well. Okay, there's one example. But at the expense of vast numbers of other companies that are no longer with us. And if you are an indexer, you own those too. And the question is the world really a better place that now everything has to be purchased online? And I don't think it is. I think Amazon's business model might be to wipe out absolutely every last brick and mortar and then build brick and mortar. I think they're
already doing it to a degree, right? They're already doing it somewhat in terms of, obviously, they got the grocery stores and there's a number of businesses, especially a lot of D2C clothing companies, right? They kind of, everything's online, everything's online, and all of a sudden they start opening up physical stores. So that makes sense. If we look at the Mag 7, there's this great chart that shows about 2008, 2009, there becomes this bifurcation or separation in the market. And pretty much since 08, 09 until today, the Mag 7 has just been on an absolute domination, trend. They are destroying the rest of the S&P. Mm-hmm. Why do you think that's happening? And is that a sign that the world is shifting to this kind of capital light, digital first, type company? Or is that something where there is this, amazing crash on the horizon that people don't really see?
Well, so I'm not a believer that crash is repair damage. So I do not believe that, what's the best example of crash? 1929, but it wasn't the 29 crash that did the damage. The best example is 87. That was a blink of an eye, right? A blink of an eye. So if we had a crash of 50% tomorrow, that would be a headline moment. The dip buyers would show up. Next thing you know, there'd be a headline saying, if you just held on, you'd be in the black by, 2 years from now, right? Never, 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 never sell. What I'm saying is if you listen to Buffett, and I'm not a Buffett fan. I think he's a fucking hoser, but he's a brilliant hoser. And what he said in that article, by the way, is the most you can hope to get out of equities overall, after all the fees and everything that you can't see. And he wasn't clear about what you can't see. He says, there's so many things you can't see. He said, the most you can hope to get is 4%. Real. A guy named Ron Grice looks at the S&P from 1925 to the present and corrects for inflation using M2. Seems like a clean way to do it. I think we've probably talked about this in the past. He gets 3.79% total return, correcting for M2. Capital gains, he gets a loss from 1925 to the present, correcting for M2. So hedging inflation, equities work fine as long as inflation's not nuts, right? So the analogy I like is shovels and bulldozers move dirt. Equities and gold hedge inflation. Don't pick the wrong tool for the job, right? And so when you need to move a little dirt, you use a shovel, you use equities, whatever. When inflation gets bad, the equities will make you suffer badly. And so right now, there's not a guy sitting on Wall Street right now who knows what a bad market looks like. We've been in a 45-year bull market. We've been in a 45-year. The pitch. Here it is again. This is a repeat, probably the third time. An 81 PE was 6. Interest rates were 16 or 17. The Russians started selling resources for pennies. The Chinese sold slave labor. And the boomers hit the market with their wives. So the demographics were phenomenal. From 81 to the present, valuations, which should not trend unless you're willing to say the cash return on them is trending the other way. Because if you're sitting at a valuation of 30, you're getting 3% return. There's no way around that. That's what it's got to give. You can't get more money out of the system than what you create. And the valuations, which should not trend, compounded 4% a year for 4 decades. When that reverses, duck.
Okay. Let me play devil's advocate, and really not even devil's advocate as much as I actually believe what I'm about to say. 2008, 2009, Ben Bernanke and the rest of the crew, they come up with the genius plan to literally press a button and create money.
You don't believe the genius part.
And then they put that money into a select few banks or financial institutions, bank accounts, and let them go buy assets in the market. This idea of creating money and creating lots of money, first it was hundreds of billions, now it's trillions of dollars at a time, took them 15 years or so to perfect the playbook. COVID happens, and they are sitting there saying, "Put me in, coach. I've been practicing. I'm good. I'm ready to go. Give me some game time."
Yeah, I blame them. I put that on them 100%. Yes.
Let me get up to bat, coach. Coach puts them up, and they hit a grand slam. First at bat. They slam trillions of dollars. They got the politicians printing money as well. They got interest rates down. The emergency cut. I mean, just you couldn't draw it up better. They hit a grand slam, market V recovery, right back to all-time highs before the end of the year. So now we went from, hey, we're hitting, batting practice in 2008, 2009, trying to figure out our swing, to we know we can hit grand slams. Any market downturn that we face moving forward, they're going to get right back up there and they're going to hit grand slams. They're going to slam interest rates to zero. They're going to print trillions, if not at some point, tens of trillions of dollars. And I find it very hard to see a world where we will experience in my lifetime an 18-month or longer bear market, recession, whatever you want to call it, unless there is total destruction of the US dollar. There's default, there's some like existential kind of blowing up of the system.
Right.
But
those tend not to be important either, in my opinion. Those tend to not be. That's all. I don't look for wars or things to shake the markets back to the foundation. So first and foremost, there are listeners who are listening to you going, if you saw my fucking grocery bill, you'd eat shit and die right now. They would. There are enormous numbers of people who do not know how they're going to pay their bills.
Today's episode is brought to you by Ledger. They're celebrating 10 years as the most trusted name in crypto security. With over 7 million users and 20% of the world's digital assets secured, Ledger continues to lead the way in protecting your crypto and digital ownership. Their latest devices, Ledger Stax and Ledger Flex, feature the world's first secure touchscreens, making managing your assets easier and safer than ever. Plus, the new Ledger Security Key app offers a secure alternative to traditional passwords, enhancing your digital security. Go to ledgerpomp.com to take control of your digital future. That's ledgerpomp.com. LEDGER pomp.com.
And so the markets in theory can keep going up, but at some point, what happens? Populism. Who'd we elect? Trump. We mowed those lefty commie dogs down. Second of all, look around the world. Democracies are collapsing all over the world. Trudeau, Romania, England, Germany. They're throwing the bums out. This is Western Spring. Something's happening in the world. Thirdly, and I don't know, someone asked me in a podcast, I think it was yesterday, I really got to stop doing podcasts on a day-by-day basis. Where did they hide the inflation? And I don't have a good answer to that. So again, back to Ron Grice's chart, there's M2. M2 shut up everywhere for 100 plus years. Where do they hide the inflation? And part of it has to do with China's making things for dirt cheap, which they'll never do again, right? That's over. And if Trump, brings stuff back here, inflation's going to get bad. But I blame the Fed for the lockdown. If they hadn't behind closed doors said, yeah, we'll cover your ass, they couldn't have locked down. So the Fed owns the lockdown, in my opinion. They had said, no, it'll cause inflation. That'll be a problem. Don't do it. Wouldn't happen. And so what happened? So they went direct at BlackRock's request. And then we got massive inflation finally. The inflation that has scared me for a very long time. And in my opinion, it's way worse than they report. The Boston Commission fucked up the inflation metrics. Our dashboard is telling us we're doing 55 and when we're doing 75. Our dashboard is telling us our tires are fine, even though they're flat. Our dashboard is telling us that the engine's fine, even though it's overheating. So we're getting bad reads on everything because they fucked up all the reads, right? The jobs numbers are like 3 million out of whack, right? I mean, they have caused everything that would tell us that we have problems to refuse to tell us we have problems. Now, here's what I think will happen. We will have the next thing where they want to be put in the game. And inflation will go nuts, undeniably nuts. And then they'll say, we can't do this anymore. They've run out of slack. They've run out of the system. And the Fed, I don't know, it's recently, 4 or 5 years ago, there was one Fed governor, Rivlin, I think, said, no one knows there's inflation, therefore there can't be inflation. I'm going, you're a fucking moron. But what she's really saying is without the inflation expectations, things are pretty safe. Well, the inflation expectation is now built into the system. Watch union activity. Watch if you were going to build a house 3 years from now, and you said, give me an estimate to the contractor, how much is that guy going to add to assume an inflationary 3 years? He's going to put like 30% on that fucking house. That's inflation expectation, right? Before you could say, well, I don't even have to account for inflation because it's tame, right? I don't think it ever was tame. Go to Chapwood, go to Shadow Stats. Inflation's been some handful of percent higher than they've been telling us, and they're happy to lie to us about that, right? Boskin Commission, which came up with a new way to lie to us, actually published their new inflation metric on the Social Security website, which is where they most would like to lie to us because they've inflation correct. So I believe that they are now about to be boxed in by inflation. And therefore your model, put me in the game, coach, you say, well, dude, you blew out both your knees now. You can't go back in the game because it's not going to work.
You think
you're
that
old. You're 45 years old.
You think there's a world where the Fed's playbook that they've perfected over the last, decade and a half, they will do it one more time. It'll be so bad that then everyone says, no way.
I think they might, just starting it might cause the trouble. So it might be that they'll do it and cause terrible problems. By the way, I don't think you can inflate your way out of the problems we have either. Can you add this a legitimate question? It's not a rhetorical question to trap you or anything. Can you name a country that inflated their way out of debt? I can't.
No, not out of debt. But
well, we have debt.
Yeah.
Israel might be an example, but here's the problem. I'm reading a book about Israel, and I don't want to talk about it because I don't want to get killed. It's by John Mearsheimer. I'll recommend the book. It's called The Israel Lobby. And I was told by a Canadian intelligence guy who said, look, all these things you're trying to understand, read this book. It'll help you. And so for all I know, we bailed out Israel to get them out of their mess. But it's the best example. It appears as though they debased the shit out of the shekels, and then spent some time suffering, and then somehow got it together. But it's very, very hard to know where that money flowed from to help them.
A huge part of the debt, I think, is the politicians have been spending like idiots. And I don't think it's just the politicians. I think just in society in general, we have lost our minds when it comes to expenses. I always joke, like a business, basically, we make more money or we can spend less money. We have no concept of spending less money. And you use a couple of examples in the year in review, but the one that I thought was most interesting is it's true in schools, but it's also true in healthcare, where the physicians, there's been moderate growth, but the administration kind of class of the healthcare system has exploded. And I think that I saw somewhere for schools, very similar, the number of students has increased like 5% or something. The number of administrators has like doubled, in that same time frame.
Here's an example. Ithaca High School has what are called typists. Now, they're not typing, right? That's just the name of the line. They're doing some administrative thing. When you went to school, what was your administration look like when you were in high school, right? Maybe 4 guidance counselors, vice principal, principal, couple secretaries in the main office, a nurse, right? A couple of janitors. It's a high school with graduating classes of maybe 400, 22 typists, right? And this is in the digital world, right? This wonderful world that you say, we're going digital. We got more bodies than we're supposed to have. So I don't think the digital world is helping us that much. I don't believe it. I think that, I don't know what your world's like because it's so different than mine, but I do so much shit myself that used to be done by someone else. And I'm being asked to go online to do shit. And it's a wretched experience. So
my favorite is, you go to, CVS or Duane Reade, you got to check out for yourself. You go to McDonald's, you got to order for yourself in the kiosk. Every time I always say the same thing because they always have somebody there, they're kind of monitoring the 5 or 6 different kiosks or whatever. And I always say the same thing. Idiots
like me who can't figure out how to do it.
Yeah. Well, I always say the same thing. I say, this is the greatest business ever. You got me working for you while I'm paying you to buy items. And they always laugh. And then I walk out and I say to myself, I wasn't joking. right? I mean, it's crazy.
Well, how do you like it when you buy, say, a cup of coffee and the person turns the cash register at you and there's an 18% tip box?
Yeah.
Right. And you go, you didn't do any, if someone waits on my table, I get the tip. What they're doing is they're adding the cost of that labor onto the tip.
Of course.
That's why I'm torn when I don't give the tip, because you didn't do anything for me. You just gave me a cup of coffee. But it's also true they're probably paid even less because the tip is making up the difference. And so I'm torn on that. And I have 2 kids who have degrees in hotel management. I talk to them about, what should I do when I'm asked to tip?
What do they say?
They say no.
They say no.
But I don't think they understand the modern economics.
Yeah.
Of the fact that this person might be paid $6 an hour.
I always do it, but I say to myself, I hope it goes to the person, not the company.
That's one of the reasons why I pay cash when I tip. Is that I think the odds of them sticking their hand in the cash thing and pulling it out and getting to take it home. But then you get this stupid thing where Trump comes up with it and then Harris comes up with it because she didn't have an original thought in her entire life, best I can tell. To people who get tips to be tax exempt. It's just a payment.
Yeah.
Why does getting tipped get you tax exemption? It makes no sense whatsoever. It sounds like you're helping the little guy. That's what it sounds like. People who get tipped are down the food chain.
Of course.
Right. So it's a blue collar sort of.
One of the things I've been saying to people is if you put a president in the White House who measures the health of the U.S. economy by the level of the stock market, there are very high odds that the stock market will continue to go up because he will throw everything he's got at it to finish. Are you
listening to what he's saying, though, now?
About?
The stock market. He's downplaying it.
He is, but then he's also saying that interest rates are too high. And I think I think that what he is doing is he's
expectation.
He's playing the classic let me talk about how bad of a job I'm walking into, how hard this is, look at all the problems, whatever, and then 4 years later he can claim victory. Now, one thing that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about that I think,
but he needs the correction to appear soon.
Of course.
Right. So he needs the carnage to appear soon enough where he can say, look at what I inherited from Biden. The longer it goes. So I don't think you're going to see Trump trying to pump the markets up. When he took over in 2016, by contrast, he spent 4 years trying to get reelected. He doesn't have that now. He's worried about legacy.
So this is going to be my point. I do not hear a lot of people talking about the fact that Donald Trump knows in 4 years he can't be president again. And so he can throw the kitchen sink. He's 78, 79, whatever he is, years old. And so there's an element of kind of like, whatever I do in the next 4 years, I'm going to be remembered for. And whatever the long-term pain is, whatever, the stock market performance after I leave it, all that stuff is not going to be associated with me. If I want people to think I was the greatest president of in history, I could throw the kitchen sink at, make sure the stock market's higher, the economy's rocking, jobs are filled, all this stuff. And so it makes me wonder, even if all the metrics.
You're at too low a level.
All right.
So
teach me.
I think sorry for wiggling. My brother said, stop wiggling. I said, fuck that. I think he is looking at a higher plane. And that is, I think he sees the United States in big trouble. And I think this is fantasy, but I think he sees a country that is in desperate need of repair, and that to be a great president, he's going to have to fix that. And he's going to have to, and that's not pumping the stock market, and that's not pumping the economy. So I think within a week of him getting inaugurated, we're going to see fireworks, right? I think he's not coming out of the gate slow.
In what way?
Well, for day one, I think he'll probably pardon all the J6ers. Let's start with an easy one. He should. Put it this way, I will be so disappointed if he does. But I also think, for example, if Musk is given advisory power that I'm hoping. Did you read Musk's biography?
Yes, I did.
Is there anyone more qualified to cut costs than Musk?
Oh, I think that he is
off the charts,
uniquely positioned. I'll even give you an anecdote for you. So I went and I was meeting with somebody that works at X, at Twitter. And he happened to be working there before. He was there during the cuts intimately, in the room, saw a lot of the stuff, whatever. The stories that he told me would blow your mind. Because we all know he cut 80% of the staff.
The guys who tried to short Tesla, if they had an advanced copy of that biography, they would have never fallen into that trap.
I don't agree with that. You know why? Because I think that so many of them, everyone talks about like Trump derangement syndrome, the like Elon derangement syndrome. It got them. It didn't matter. What they would do is they would go through the book. I know some of these guys, right? They would go through the book and they would tell you how it's all bullshit, that Walter Isaacson is exaggerating. He got paid under the table. Elon's lying, blah, 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 whatever. I saw recently Matt Levine at Bloomberg, who I really, really respect. I think he does a fantastic job of breaking down pretty complex things in a simple language, et cetera. And he put it perfectly. He said, Musk works 100% of his time on SpaceX. Musk also works 100% of his time on Tesla. He also works 100% of his time, right? Like that is the public facing.
And he's
image.
tweeting 24 hours a day.
So he went through it. He talked about Twitter or whatever. And he goes, and then by the way, he recently became one of the top players in the world at Diablo 4. It's like, video game or whatever. And he spent 100% of his time on that. So you go through all this and you say, wait a second, like how does he do it? And he's like, there's theories that the video game, he paid someone to do it. Or there's theories that, he's really good at delegation. Or there's theories that, whatever.
I thought about that. Yeah. I wondered.
Whatever the thing is, right? He has convinced people that he works really hard. But really, if you look at why has he been so successful, in my mind, it's because he has one of the greatest bullshit filters in all of business. He's able to.
In his biography where he's looking at a $1.5 million refrigeration unit to be purchased from Boeing, and he says, fuck it, goes down to Walmart and grabs 2 air conditioners and cobbles them together.
Of course.
And so, as I've said to people, he buys Twitter, overpays by some people's reckoning, although it's nothing for him. I mean, it's a lot of money for him, but he's probably going to get it back. But if you said he's going to go in and fire the leftovers, you would have said, 20%, 25%. He fires 90%. So if there's a person who has the capacity to go, so day one, here's what I'd love to see. Let's just I want to see Pyrrhic victories. They don't to actually cut your way into a balanced budget of any kind is not possible at this point. I do not believe it's even theoretically possible. Because
there's only like 13% or whatever that's like non-defense, non-discretionary, or discretionary spending or whatever.
Well, he could cut defense.
Well, hold on. So there's a couple of issues here. So this whole idea, there's $2 trillion annual deficit. I've heard estimates. Howard Lutnick told me that he thinks Musk is good for $500 billion right out of the gate and potentially more over time. But my understanding is that 87% of the budget is defense and or non-discretionary spending, which only leaves 13%. That if you cut 100% of it, it'd only be a 13% savings. Right. I don't know. True, not true. I think that actually your comment about fireworks, one of the fireworks that people are not ready for is there is going to be some executive power used, whether they actually can or not. They're going to go to court and they're going to say, we can override this stuff. We're going to go and we're going to get rid of all of this waste that is occurring. And I think that's going to be one of the biggest court battles of 2025 is how much power does the executive branch actually hold in terms of government spending?
So let me ask you this question. So there's a couple things here. One is, so the Pyrrhic victories, what would be a trivial one? I happen to have dinner with a lawyer who knew about things like the Chevron deference story and how profound that could be. And he said, we're just waiting right now. And that's where regulators who essentially have prosecutorial power no longer can just do that. It's more important than Roe v. Wade, in my opinion. But we're waiting to see what the consequences are. The wife turns out to be a woman who ran a not-for-profit, who organized 600 not-for-profits for disaster relief, right? She said, and I said, I guess I shouldn't mention FEMA to you then. And she said, oh my God, she started dropping F-bombs. She said, FEMA, and I've written about FEMA being worthless, destructive. She's absolutely positively confirmed that. And she said, we train our people to spot FEMA people to avoid them. and so FEMA's $29 billion. It's a drop in the bucket, but day one, gone. And you say, whoa, what will happen? Nothing. They don't do anything. You weren't listening. Read my lips, right? They don't do anything. They're worthless. So I would love to see day one FEMA gone, wiped. And then you look up and say, well, the one thing FEMA did is this. I say, okay, go do that then. Fine, have a ball.
But even that. So like this is a great example. Is I think that there are good people who work at FEMA who actually want to do a good job, etc.
She says no. She says no.
Okay, so that's even a bigger deal. But let's just say, for the sake of this argument, that there are good people there that want to do a good job, etc. There's this massive bureaucracy. Did you pay attention to what happened in the mountains of North Carolina after this flood? Okay, so one of the stories I heard that just pissed me off beyond belief, that I think really, really resonated with a lot of people, is there was a guy and his son, I think, guy's 40 years old, something like that. And his son was a teenager. And they got in their private helicopter. They flew over the mountains and they saw a husband and a wife that were on the mountain next to their home, waving down people. And he landed. He said to his son, get off, stay here with the husband. I'm going to take the wife to, the disaster relief headquarters or whatever, because the helicopter can only hold 2 people. I'll be back. He takes the wife and he lands, lets her out. And the police say to him, if you go back on that fucking mountain, we're going to arrest you. And he says, my son's up there. Do what you're going to do. I'm going to get my son. And so he loads up his helicopter with a bunch of supplies, flies back, lands, and he's got to tell the husband, I'm taking my son. Here's a bunch of supplies. I'll come back for you tomorrow, because if I take you back to that disaster relief center, they're going to arrest me. And I think about that and I say to myself, wait a second here. How is it that private citizens in that situation were able to get supplies, equipment, etc., to these people faster, more efficiently than the disaster relief?
I wrote about this after Katrina.
Okay.
I wrote about the merits of price gouging. I defended price gouging. I I got onto it by the name Mike Mungowitz, who's an economist. And I actually gave a talk at an investment meeting on the merits of price gouging.
Explain.
And I pointed out that it's a fictional thing, right? So, during a time of disaster, your neighborhood pharmacy is not going to price gouge you. Walmart's not going to price gouge you. There was a claim they did, but it turns out it was Photoshopped. You could actually see it was Photoshopped. But Walmart immediately started apologizing. Bottom line is you want some guy to load a bunch of generators in the back of his truck and go down there. And if you arrest him for price gouging, he's not going down there the next time. And he's taking risks to go down there. So this price gouging idea is just crap. You don't have to buy it if you don't want.
Well, we also call it surge pricing.
Right. So what did they do? Well, FEMA caused the deaths of many in Katrina. FEMA directly caused the deaths of many in FEMA because people tried to go down there and they cut them off. It's a turf war. So the idea that FEMA has good people is wrong. According to the woman, she said it's a reverse Darwinian selection. Anyone who's worth a shit can't stand being there. And they leave. So she said it's a DEI nightmare. It's a hierarchical nightmare. She said it is surreal to see the FEMA headquarters when they set up. Now, my wife was in the Adirondacks for Hurricane Irene, where it was a disaster. I included that in my write-up. Now, up in the Adirondacks, they take care of themselves. Everyone has a chainsaw. Everyone knows how to swing a hammer. Every third house has a backhoe. I go up there 2 weeks after Irene rips through there and floods the shit out of the North Country. And they've rebuilt all the roads already. They've done everything. They fixed everything. They're already jacking up their houses again. And my wife helped run a relief center that they set up. And about 2 weeks later, FEMA shows up, puts up a banner, takes a photo, puts literally a Band-Aid on one guy's finger, and then leaves. So FEMA, line them up, shoot them. I don't care what you do. Get rid of FEMA. right? The problem is the federal government has a ton of agencies like this, a ton. And so that's why I want to release Elon, say, start cutting. We will undo some of the damage you do. I want you to go in with a chainsaw and start cutting. And when we find out there's something we needed that you cut off a limb, we'll stitch it back on if we have to. And so that's what and that might be fantasy island for me, right? I might just be dreaming that that's going to happen, but I don't want anyone to stop them.
Well, part of what I think is so interesting here is we're going to find out who actually has true power. He's got, I think, 200 million followers on Twitter. How much is like sunlight truly disinfectant? And we saw the one bill that was going through, and he started tweeting about it, him and Vivek, and they were able to show, look how crazy this bill is. Well, here's all the stuff in it, whatever. All of a sudden, there's pressure. The politicians cave. They come back. They get something else approved. And what cracked me up was everyone who did not like what he was doing started saying, "Oh, who elected the billionaire to run the country?" Blah blah blah, whatever.
Hey,
but what I kept thinking to myself is, wait a second here. This is the will of the people. All he's doing is he's telling everyone else, look at the craziness of what they're doing. And everyone is getting upset. Right?
So the beauty of Elon is the fact that he's on the spectrum means, there is the deep state Elon, right? Every company's ever done is deep state. But I also believe the deep state desperately needs them and they can't control them. So it's one of these things where it is a wild creature. It's like a camel or something, where at the one hand you need them, on the other hand they'll bite you if you turn your back on them. And so I think Elon could be a great force for good, and I'm hoping he is. And I hope he doesn't turn out to be a wolf in sheep's clothing. Again, his biography paints the same picture of him that I'm now portraying of him. I think Trump's A-team, every single one of them, they're young, they're brawlers. They each have a personal reason why they don't like the system that existed before they got in there, whether it's Bhattacharya or Tulsi Gabbard or RFK is talking about making America healthy again. You wait till he's confirmed also it's going to be, fuck that healthy shit, we're going after pharma. Right? He can't go after pharma now. He's trying to make America healthy again. So I would say, oh yeah, I'm fine if he wants to make, broccoli the vegetable of the country, right? But that's not what he's spent 35 years chasing. That's what he's been spent the last 6 months chasing, trying to look harmless. And by the way, all the bullshit Trump puts out there, I mean, actually taking over Greenland, there's some logic. I'm not sure about Canada. Panama Canal is profoundly logical. Apparently, that's a big issue. I think the Greenlanders might even like to be a U.S. protectorate at this point instead of Denmark.
Let's talk about each one of these three. Well, why do you think Greenland makes sense?
Let me point out what's happening here. While we are talking about Trump naming the Gulf of America, we're not talking about his appointments. Now, who's it providing cover for? Well, first of all, it's providing cover for Trump. It's also providing cover for the other team that's probably going to have to let this shit go by. And they don't want this on the headlines that they lost and Kennedy got in and Tulsi got in. And so they'd like to be talking about other topics too if these appointments are going to get made. Now, two other things. One is recess appointments. You can make an appointment at recess. And so I think he can make these appointments whether they like it or not. Two, there's some goddamn arcane law, which I can't remember the name of, where they can pass a law to spend money and the president can say, yeah, fine, but we're not spending it. And so he may have the power to say, look, here it is in the budget, but it's just sitting in a bank account right now.
That'd be powerful.
That's a fun story.
Do you think he's naming the Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America to get around all of this drilling stuff?
Could be. It also could be there's a certain logic to it because it really does bridge the two Americas. And I don't see why you'd have to change the name, but history's filled with abrupt changes and crap like that.
Yeah. Because the argument that I saw that, again, you don't know how much of this is his thinking or not, But if Biden's going to put all this stuff in and say, hey, you can't do certain things with drilling in the Gulf of Mexico, and then he just renames it the Gulf of America, he says, well, that law is no longer makes sense.
Right. It could be that it somehow negates contracts, right? The other thing I would like to know is if there's a way to take, I think Biden's administration, I hesitate to say Biden because we know he's got no brain left, but I'm going to say Biden. I think all these things that are being passed that are sort of what's called green goblin strategy, destroy the joint on the way out, right? They might be negated simply, right? It might be trivial to negate them, but if, let's say it's not, I think you take them to court and you say not of sound mind and body. I think you say the guy was demented.
Well, he can't stand trial.
No, but forget that. You just say the signature that put this into place is not a valid signature.
No, that's what I'm saying. If somebody already determined you're not fit to stand trial, then how are you fit to sign a contract?
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you know what you do for the next 4 years? You fight in court. And what's going on? None of the shit that he wanted to do. That's what's not going on. None of it's happening.
Yeah, that makes sense. Greenland and the Panama Canal. Let's start with those two. You think they make sense? Today's episode is brought to you by NASDAQ-listed BitDeer. They trade under the stock ticker BTDR. They're led by a seasoned management team. BitDeer is a global leader in Bitcoin mining and high-performance computing for artificial intelligence, and they are backed by technological innovation and a massive 2.5 gigawatt global power portfolio. Recently, BitDeer launched its own Bitcoin mining ASICs named the Seal Miner to target what Wall Street analysts project to be a multi-billion-dollar annual market. Their proprietary Seal Miner ASICs are redefining efficiency and performance, and they are backed by the industry's most advanced chip roadmap, with 2 more groundbreaking models set to launch in 2025. To learn more about BitDeer's cutting-edge technology and business, visit their website at bitdeer.com. That's BITDEER.com. Go check out BitDeer today.
Yeah, Greenland's got 20,000 people. They're proximate to the Western, they're in the Western Hemisphere, right? Denmark has done nothing with it. Being under the United States umbrella might appeal to the Greenlanders, right? They might say, hey, we'll get welfare and all sorts of crap, right? I don't know what the resource play in Greenland is. I've heard stories that underneath that sheet of ice is a wealth of resources. And I'm sure that there are people who are appalled by that thinking, but that would explain why Greenland's a bigger stakes than they say. It's quite possible the Ruskies are going, oh shit, they're going to get Greenland. I can't believe it. Panama Canal, I think it's just, Panama Canal is for us is what Ukraine is for Putin. We can't let someone get control of it. I've heard that there's trouble. I've heard that we're at risk. And so for us to go down there and say, look, we gave the canal back. Sorry, that was stupid. We're taking it back. If you don't like it, meet Mr. F-15 over here, F-16, F whatever. We're taking it, right? And that would not be irrational. I've become a bit of a dove in my old age here. I think we fight way too many wars, and I know you're ex-military, and I bet you think so too. But I think sending some Marines down to the canal to make sure that we take control of it again. Again, I'm not up to speed, so it's possible that's just a red herring and that we haven't lost control and it's a stupid thing. But
I think right now control, it's kind of like if you have a car and you let your kid drive it, but they got to bring it back. It's still your car. Yeah. I think there's a little bit of that going on right now. From what I understand, is like the U.S. is definitely a heavy presence still, and all of that. I think the concern from what I've read is it's more about the influence from the East, and specifically China starting to go. I mean, look, there are a number of different stories.
Yeah, I've heard it's China that's the problem.
I've heard a number of different stories about, for example, software in the cranes in U.S. ports have over-the-air update capabilities and backdoors, et cetera. And there are very real national security concerns around that software, because if somebody in China could shut off the cranes in our ports, that'd probably be bad.
Yeah, right.
Right. So there's all these things. And you go,
China could shut off so much of what we do. I mean, that's true. I don't know it as in factually know it, but put it this way, you would have to be safe, you would have to assume they have the capacity to do so. The ship that hit the bridge in Baltimore, right? That's a great example. What's the story there? Well, the ship lost, power, and it went off course and hit the bridge and knocked the entire bridge over. And then it gets absurd. I actually thought the thing backed into it. I kept looking at the video going, it looks to me like it cleared the pylon and backed into it. But then it turns out wiped out a huge port, a really important port. And then you find out that the company that owns it is Chinese. You find out that it's actually a company that's known for its super high-tech remote monitoring and control of their ships. And you go, and that they lost power. And then they talk about the FBI retrieving the black box. And I go, retrieving the black box? It didn't sink. You walk in the ship and say, give me the fucking black box, right? And then the question is, a ship that's supposedly under a high-tech ship, they don't have a black box. That shit's going straight to the cloud. Right? There's not a black box. Why would you ever have a black box again, right? And so the whole story's crap. Looks to me like a beta test of hacking a ship, which supposedly are very hackable. And they sent the ship into the bridge to say, oh, yeah, that worked. That's pretty cool.
Do you think they'll ever rebuild the Baltimore Bridge?
I am told that bridge was built because you can't send toxic and dangerous things through the tunnels.
No.
And
no. You're answering, why is the bridge there? Do you think with all of the environmental permitting, with all of the bureaucracy, etc.,
pull it off?
Do you think that we will ever rebuild that bridge?
Don't you think it's possible that when the federal government decides it's time we need a bridge, that they're just going to say, screw that and do it?
No.
Okay. That's
because in LA, there's no water in the fire hydrants.
Wait a minute. LA still exists?
There's no water in the fire hydrants because I didn't know how big a smelt fish is, but I've been down my rabbit hole. Big as my hand. A little tiny fish.
Smelts are tiny.
Yeah,
they're
little
like
tiny fish.
Like anchovies. Yeah.
Ensured that there was no water in the fire hydrants. How much of the brush, all the things that people know that you should do to protect against this stuff, how much of it didn't get done because they were held hostage by the environmentalists and kind of the extremes in that whole process? And then you want to tell me you're going to go build one of the largest bridges in America in the ocean? I don't know.
Well, except for the fact that the not doing what the thing they failed to do in LA, the consequence has not yet shown up. To rebuild the bridge, the consequence predates the process. So now that LA's burned to the ground, the rules may change immediately. The bridge, now that it's in the middle of the drink, the rules may change immediately. Now,
you want to know what my prediction for LA is?
Yeah.
They will rebuild, and there will be the biggest fights are going to be over racial segregation.
Oh, I would have no trouble imagining that. But it's going to be an unbelievably complicated story. The other thing that clicked this morning when I retweeted a meme and I said, wait a minute, that's not funny at all. How many people who are not on radar died in LA that we're not hearing about? How many illegals? How many kids? How many trafficked kids that came across the southern border? Right?
Did you see the Weather Channel clip?
I don't know.
On Twitter? There's it's horrific and incredibly sad, but the Weather Channel is panning over the destruction, and they zoom in on a house, and there's human remains, or what at least looks like human remains.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Sitting right there, and the camera guy doesn't realize at first, and all of a sudden he like zoom, kind of like moves the camera in a way where it looks like he like realized what was happening. It's on live TV, and right before this, I went and I looked. They're saying that it's about 30,000 acres of land that's been burnt. They're saying there's over 10,300 structures that have been destroyed. They're claiming at the moment of what they know, there's at least 10 people that are dead. I've got to imagine the number is much, much higher than that.
It's got to be 10 times that minimum. I mean, there's so many people who are not on a radar.
Yeah. So you get that. Then you've got the estimates right now are like $135 billion of damage.
0% containment of the fire.
Crazy.
With supposedly arsonists running all over the place. By the way, if you were a foreign national that got shipped over the southern border to cause trouble, now's a good time to cause trouble.
Do you know who Joshua Steinman is? Does that name ever come up?
Oh, no. Tell me.
So Joshua Steinman is he was previously on the National Security Council. Served in the military and now runs a company that is fully focused on protecting critical infrastructure from cyber threats. Right. So, I made a small investment in the company. Really, it's just hey, I like this guy. I want to back Joshua. But the company Galvanic is fully focused on, the equivalent would be water treatment plants and various, critical infrastructure. How do you make sure that adversaries aren't able to hack them, et cetera? You know how some people on Twitter have something they tweet all the time, and as they tweet it, they see news stories and they just like keep reminding you of the same phrase, right? And it's their worldview. Joshua Steinman's phrase that he continuously tweets over and over again is one question. How many foreign sabotage teams are already in the United States?
Oh, I've asked that question so many times. Now, the really interesting question is who opened those borders knowing that would happen and why? So those borders were opened up by, Biden administration of some kind, right? Just generally speaking. There is no chance that they didn't send foreign nationals who are basically hit squads across that border, because if they didn't, right, if our adversaries didn't, they're of no risk because they're just too goddamn stupid.
Well, and I think that there's two categories, right? There are what I'll call true terroristic threats. And it's very clear that there's a lot of.
And then there's the MS-13s and things like that.
So
right, MS-13s will wreak havoc.
I called a buddy of mine. Well, I called a buddy of mine who he's got a house in Hollywood Hills, and or kind of like near the canyon. And I said to him, "How's it going?" And he said, "Well, earlier today I was fighting a fire with my hose outside my house." So I said that wasn't fun. But he said, "But." He goes, there's a real problem with these gangs looting. And I said, what do you mean? This is what he described to me. He said, what you see is a car of young, usually Latin women, pull through the neighborhood. They're going incredibly slow, looking out the windows, etc. They will pull over and they'll stop. 3, 4, 5 minutes later, all of a sudden, here comes a car of young, usually Latin men, fully, decked out, ski mask, the whole thing.
Right.
They'll jump out, they'll run, they'll hit a house, they'll come back. He's like, 3 minutes, man. Back in the car, bam, they're all off. And he's like, and the women are serving as the lookout for the men.
Right. And the problem is these are houses that have been emptied because they might burn. And so these houses are in pristine condition. They're gazillionaires, whatever you want. And this is like these professional squatters and stuff. Back to the, when you have a person squatting in your house, I started to talk about this. Again, there's a thing called Squatter Squad where they go in and they clean them out for you. And there's sort of an implicit, you're going to die if you don't get out. So it's time to get out. But that doesn't work on an MS-13 squatter. Well, those guys are not going to be worried about a Louisville Slugger.
The connection between national disaster and looting is not just a foreign, kind of gang member affiliated thing, right? If you go back to Katrina, I know guys personally who were in the National Guard. They got deployed to Katrina and they said, we're going to go help people and stuff, whatever. They were walking around Walmarts with their M4s because there was cash being kept in the back because the Brink trucks couldn't come and pick up the cash. Millions of dollars, right? And so they had to protect because there's looting, there's all these issues, whatever. So like, I don't think that this is a purely American thing. I think this happens all over the world, whatever. But I do think that usually a natural disaster like a hurricane, nobody, press a button and the hurricane happens. But in this case in particular, is this the first time that we're seeing, oh, wait a second, are there people, and there's now videos online of, what it appears to be and what is being reported by the police as potential arsonists who are getting arrested for starting these fires, do they have a connection to the people who are then going and robbing the homes? We're going to find out.
So you say, let's go hit this neighborhood. So you start a fire upwind of the neighborhood. You force everyone to clear out, and then you take the neighborhood.
So here's a question that I asked on Twitter. If the fires were started by arsonists, not proven yet, but let's say if, what do you think the proper punishment should be? Death. Yeah. So the
only problem I have with the death penalty, two problems. One is we get it wrong, right? So there really are cases where some black guy spends 20 years in jail on death row and you find out he didn't do it. The second is it costs a ton of money to execute a person because of all the checks and balances. It's cheaper to just throw them in jail and not worry about it. Now, the interesting thing is that if you want to be, if you're innocent, you want to be on death row. The reason is because there's organizations trying to get you out. Once you are no longer on death row, they don't care about you.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like, obviously, if they don't get you out, it's not good.
Right.
But they're working to do it. Yeah, I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, because you've got whole organizations who think it's immoral to whack you. And I don't have a need for the death penalty. I don't, no matter how bad you are, I don't have any. I, by the way, spoke with a guy in the Adirondacks. You go through Tupper Lake, there's this humongous institution that looks like it must have been some asylum at the turn of the century or something. It's huge. It looks like it holds 2,000 people. And I ran into a guy who works there. And I said, what's in there? And he said, it turns out there's relatively few people. There's more staff than people. The people in this facility are those who, because of various ailments and stuff, are considered not qualified to be tried in a court of law because of traumatic brain injuries or whatever. And he says, the horrors behind those walls are extraordinary.
I could only imagine.
Right, but they can't be put in a normal prison and stuff, and so they have these guys in this facility. And they're often sort of low IQ functionally, there's just various characters who were deemed not capable of defending themselves in court. And by the way, that's well spent money. Two staff per person to keep that guy off the street, that's well spent money. That'll save society a lot of pain.
Of course. We have the incident in New Orleans. We have the incident in Vegas.
Vegas, there's a good one.
What I want to talk
that's a different one. I was talking about the Vegas shooting of Paddock.
No. I'm talking about the Cybertruck. One of the things that I remember when I got out of the military in the early 2010s being a topic of discussion was certain gangs, both American originated and foreign, were sending their members into the military to get trained. And then they were coming out.
Oh, man.
And the reason why, and in particular, I remember specifically, somebody showed me a video in California, and I'm not an expert on California gangs or gangs in California, but I believe that there are two gangs, the Norteños and the Sureños. And the reason why they know that some of the gang members had military training is because there was videos of them literally shootouts where they were using military tactics. And so whether
probably hand signals and everything too, right? The kind of
hand signals is the elementary. I'm talking about how do you go hit a house? How do you clear the house? How do you pie around a corner, right? I mean, just like the actual tactical use of weapons, et cetera, on this. So the reason why I say that is that's not hard to imagine. I assume that happens in many areas, around the world. Obviously, you get into the whole contractor world, whatever. But now what we start to see is those two individuals, both in New Orleans and in Las Vegas, that feels like this is a bigger story where you have a special forces guy, you've got somebody who's in the military for a long time, deployed overseas, whatever. How do you kind of sift through all this?
Well, so one of them, it gets to the question of what the hell are the comment section in podcasts. I read comments. You never know when someone's going to say, "Oh, by the way, this is a really cool video," right? But I mix up those two events. I because I've been busy and I have trouble remembering which one is which. And one of them, a reporter goes in the house after the FBI supposedly went there.
New Orleans.
That was New Orleans. And she's, first of all, I'm going, what is a reporter doing in a crime scene, right? And she goes through the house, and the door had been bashed open, supposedly. And she's walking through the house, and she's going, oh, you can see bomb-making materials here, and you can see recipes for bombs over here, and you can see the Quran is open over here. And I'm going, this is a poorly written TV show, right? This is insanity. And first of all, if the FBI had been there, every last thing in that fucking house would have been bagged up and taken away. Let's start with that. And they wouldn't leave bomb-making materials with a door bashed in, right? There's just nothing about it. And then someone posted something, said, oh, by the way, that chick, her name is such and such, she's Mossad. Now, if that's true, this plot thickened very quickly. So, but there's something wrong with all these stories. The assassination against Trump are just total nonsense if you try to interpret them literally. They're just total garbage, especially the second one.
Do you think that Trump should have the inauguration in public?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure he should be in public ever again. I don't know how you protect the guy if the deep state wants him.
Yeah.
And by the way, I'm a big believer in MK Ultra. So all you have to do is get some guy who's nuts, who's been brainwashed to go cap him. So you don't even need a clever, you no longer need a clever conspiracy. You don't, it doesn't have to be organized. You just need one guy who's willing to be self-sacrificial. And so, yeah, I don't know. I don't have an answer to that question.
Speaking of Trump, let's go back to him coming into office. Do you think that he reignites inflation?
I don't know. I think inflation might reignite anyways. But if you bring manufacturing ashore, that will reignite inflation, right?
Explain that.
Well, it's going to cost more, right? You don't buy a 6-pack of tube socks for $10 that are made in the United States, right? Right now, with the globalization, I mean, the guys who want to onshore manufacturing are forgetting about the basic principle of economics is that the free market goes and finds the cheapest place to do stuff, right? And so if China can they no longer make. Remember post-war Japan. This is the pattern every time. So Japan comes out of World War II. What do they make? They first make trinkets. Made in Japan was like meant it was crap. And then you start noticing the stuff's getting better. It's getting more sophisticated. Next thing you know, those Toyotas are pretty good cars, right? Oh, Sony just invented a Walkman, right? And so you go through this hierarchy of improvement. So China started out making bullshit, right? Dirt cheap trinkets, stuff you buy in the dollar store or whatever. And now they're making shit that we don't know how to make, right? It's at that level. And so if you bring manufacturing stuff onshore, it by definition will cost more because you are artificially shutting down the mechanism by which you find the cheapest price. Now, here's the problem with offshoring it. The revenue and income and wealth creation and accumulation is somewhere else, which means we have this big trade imbalance and this big debt. And so it's lining the pockets of people in other countries and elevating their quality of life and their standard of living. Because that's where it's being made, that's where the profits are being made. Then we get cheap goods, but we're buying increasingly. We took on debt to buy them because we weren't making it here. And by the way, the digital world that you like, that's not being made here either. Hey, that coding is not being done here. I don't even know why they care about this visa issue. They can just offshore the whole thing.
One of the big Trump policies that he promised on the campaign trail is the strategic Bitcoin reserve, where the United States would hold the 200,000 Bitcoin it already has, and it would buy more Bitcoin. Do you think that he'll do it?
I don't know. Trump should be taken seriously and never literally. So you can't whatever he says, there's an art of the deal component to it. Everything he says, best I can tell. I have a question for you. There's a quote by a person named Williamson, and I don't want to go deep into Bitcoin because you and I are on the other side of each other on this, but I'm by no means hostile to you guys. I totally support all your principles.
We're sound money allies. That's
right. I have a ton of gold. You have a ton of Bitcoin. We'll swap a few occasionally, right?
I don't want your gold.
Fuck you. There's a woman, someone said, at some point, will the energy cost of a transaction of Bitcoin, is it going up with the growth of the Bitcoin? Is that a natural component of Bitcoin?
No, I think it's been the opposite. So one of the interesting things is, let's just take, energy used per transaction. If you are able to drop the energy cost, obviously, that will be attractive.
No, I'm just talking quantity of energy.
Yeah.
Quantity of energy. Forget the cost.
What actually has happened is we have been able to make Bitcoin more efficient. So each block, without getting into too much details, each block of transactions, say 1 megabyte of transactions fit in there. What has been developed is something called the Lightning Network, which allows you to make tons of transactions and fit, all those transactions into that block that you otherwise couldn't. And so each block is becoming kind of more dense with transactions, if you think of it in that way. Got it. And so I actually think that part is not really that exciting. Like, it's already kind of happened, right? I think the energy side is the more interesting one. I'll give you 2 ideas. A guy reached out to me, and I don't know if it's possible or not, but he said, listen, one of the benefits of Bitcoin is that you can actually monetize energy at the point of creation or the point of consumption.
Right. Stranded energy is a good way to think of it. I like it.
So gas flaring, et cetera. Yeah. He said to me, well, why don't we just launch a bunch of satellites with solar power, miners, use Starlink, and now you can bring the monetization of space solar energy back down to Earth.
Has anyone done the cradle to grave energetic cost of doing that?
I have a couple people who have sent me.
By the way, cradle to grave is a bitch of a calculation, and that's where the alternative energy guys lie their ass off.
Yeah. Well, so there's a couple people who have sent me different calculations, not the full calculation you're describing. And one of the big issues is the heat, right? That these miners create. And so then you get into like, well, do you have to do some sort of like internal, kind of sealed cooling? Do you do like immersion cooling inside of the equivalent of like the next ISS? I'm not smart enough to figure that out, but I thought that was very interesting okay, so now we've got multiple technologies coming together. You've got Starlink, you've got Bitcoin, you've got solar, whatever, right? So that brings me to artificial intelligence, which feels like with the rise of AI and AI agents and kind of all this stuff, money is going to have to become digital. So whether it's stable coins and it's just, dollars on these.
Oh, it is going to become digital. There's no question.
Yeah. These technologies are all coming together because, if you take Tesla, they've got the robotics, they've got the artificial intelligence, machine learning, they've got Bitcoin on their balance sheet. Like, these companies really are starting to kind of push this stuff together. And so there's 2 questions that I think are interesting. One, for people like you and I, how do we know what we see, read, or hear is real?
Oh, God, yes. That's the $1 million question now, and it's actually getting harder and harder with each passing year.
Yeah. I mean,
now that remember the title, read my title. What's my title? You got it right there. What's the title?
What is a fact?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, look,
that's the problem.
I was reading a book recently, and it was making the argument that human intelligence is more complex and unknown compared to machine intelligence. And so no matter how many innovations we make on the machine intelligence side, we're still not getting closer to the kind of general intelligence because we don't know enough about the human intelligence component. And there's things in the book that I thought were interesting. There were things I disagreed with in the book, whatever. But one of the things that was a great reminder was the exact wording that Alan Turing used when he created what now is known as the Turing test. right? And for those that don't know, is there used to be I think it was a game where there was like a referee or a judge. There's a man and a woman. They couldn't see each other, and the referee couldn't see either one of them. And he tried to guess who's the man, who's the woman. And I think the man was supposed to deceive the judge. The woman was supposed to help the judge. And so the whole idea was like, can they figure out who the man is and who the woman is? And Alan Turing used that as inspiration to come up with the idea of, if you have a human and a computer both submit a piece of paper, or a writing, can I tell which one's created by the computer, which one's created by the human? And that was the Turing test, the original Turing test. I don't know about you, but I read shit that ChatGPT writes. I got no clue. I couldn't tell you if
I know.
human
There's people who claim they can see that it's ChatGPT. I was going to teach a writing course. Cornell has freshman writing courses. And the idea is, look, you learn to write, but we'll offer any imaginable topic. You can Dostoevsky, science, whatever, but you're going to write papers and they're going to edit your papers, right? And I was going to teach a freshman writing seminar. I got clearance from both sides on personal finance. And I figured it would be real beets and carrots, savings, 401ks, difference between Roth and regular IRA, which I have a serious bone to pick with the Roth IRA, things like that. And just talk about, the costs of college even, how do you think about paying back these loans? And how do you think about saving? How do you think about the cost of owning a car? Right? All these things. And then ChatGPT showed up and I said, fuck it, I'm not doing it. Because I didn't want to be editing a bunch of papers written by a fucking computer. Mm-hmm. I could just go search it myself by that. It just didn't inspire me. I find Grok really useful.
So do
By the way, we've probably talked about, I did a debate with Steve Keen on climate change. And I happen to, and I don't know if it's in this part or in the next part, but I write about climate change. And years ago, I gave up on it and said, no, it's a total grift. I think it's 100% grift. But I went to Grok and I said, in very straightforward language, I said, Grok, could you please provide a list of 20 prominent scientists who think that climate change is not a crisis? And Grok fired out 20 names. I knew at least maybe 18 of the 20. And it even gave some information about what each one thought. And then I changed the question just a little bit. And I said, Grok, could you give me a list of 10 scientists, 10 solar physicists who think climate change is a crisis? And Grok said, there are no definitive statements by solar physicists saying climate change is a crisis. The solar physicists, the guys who understand the sun cycles, the source of all this heat that we're supposedly worried about, there's not a single solar physicist of any consequence whatsoever who thinks it's CO2. That should rattle the cage of, there are climate change cultists who will their heads will explode. They'll find some reason to ignore that fact. There aren't even solar physicists on the IPCC, which is the Bible report. The solar physicist said, dude, there's fusion going up in that ball of flame up there, right? That's the source of all the cycles you're seeing in the temperature of the earth right there. That's it, period, QED. It's not about CO2. It's not about any of that shit. And so I find Grok really useful because oftentimes, you Google something and you get all these links, you're clicking trying to find one that doesn't have the bullshit. You go to Grok and it provides you a couple of paragraphs. So it's a great improvement in searching, in my opinion, especially if you're clueless of where to start.
Completely agree. So,
but at the same time, it also is in the middle of this. And I gave this example I just gave you in the debate on climate change. It was great. But I referred to AI as squeegeeing the drippings of the internet, the drippings off the floor of the internet. It was just, you don't know what you're getting, right?
I also think that AI, and the second point is coming for people's jobs that previously thought their job was safe.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Like people knew the self-driving cars, whatever. Like there was some easy low-hanging fruit. Okay, this is what this technology does. Here's a job it could replace. I don't know, man. Artists.
Well, the problem is technology always comes for people's jobs.
Yeah.
So here's the problem with creative destruction.
Today's episode is brought to you by Meanwhile. Meanwhile is the world's first licensed and regulated life insurance company built for the Bitcoin economy. Operating on the Bitcoin standard, they do everything in Bitcoin. You pay in Bitcoin. They pay claims to your family in Bitcoin. You take out policy loans entirely in Bitcoin when you need liquidity. Meanwhile, Bitcoin life insurance has redefined what it means to hodl. Protect your family from life's uncertainty in a broken financial system. Build intergenerational Bitcoin wealth while the cost of living skyrockets in dollar terms. Get all the tax and legal benefits of life insurance now in Bitcoin. They are actively binding policies today. Whether you are a long-term Bitcoiner or are just considering it for the first time, a Bitcoin whole life policy could make sense for your wealth plan. Visit their website, meanwhile.bm, to join the waitlist and to learn more about the world's first Bitcoin life insurer. Again, that's meanwhile.bm. Go check them out today.
Creative destruction is a good thing. But what you have to get out of it is each generation has to sort of amortize, right? You have to pay the cost of that generation, make something out of it before the next generation comes. So, for example, we went through blockbuster videos, right? And that was great. The question is, it obviously was an important stepping stone to the digital world. But the question is, can you afford for creative destruction to be fast? Because you'll build and destroy a lot of stuff if and this hit me one day when I moved into labs that were pretty new because the old labs were unsafe. And I move in and we were talking about hiring some new kid and that we'd put them in labs who were 6 years old. And they said, well, we have to renovate them. I said, no, you can't do a lab renovation and get 6 fucking years out of it. You got to get 30 or 40 years out of it. Right. And that's when it sort of clicked that if you think creative destruction can't be too fast, every 2 years, bulldoze your house and build a better one and see how that works out for you. You have to get the benefits of that generation. I think we're accelerating through a lot of generations of stuff. One could even argue that what it means therefore is don't put out the incremental new generations that fast. And that may be a consequence of bad monetary policy, for example. It might be easy money allows you to build the next generation, which is not a good enough generation to justify bazillions of dollars, but you did it because money was cheap. So if you say, no, we're going to keep developing, now we should strike. Now we should build better houses, right? And the cheap money causes a lot of things to happen that you don't even know are necessarily due to cheap money.
I agree. The last thing on AI and robotics and automation that I think is fascinating, is going to drastically change the world, is we have essentially normalized the use of automated kamikazes with these drones. Who talked about that? Someone, did you see the interview of Tucker Carlson with the ex-CIA guy? I did not.
And it was really interesting because he talked about the CIA and you go, I know he's lying about a percentage of this. Some of the stuff I go, what he just said, I do not believe. He says, I know of no example of, and you go, well, I'm sure it happened, so you're bullshitting us. But at the end, he talked about the total game change of drones and how the risk it poses to militaries that are based on the zillions of dollars of investment, where a drone can just wreak havoc.
Just forget the military for a second. I'm not saying that this is true. I'm not saying that I know one way or the other. I think we should ask the question. Yesterday, it was reported that I think they are called skimmers, the planes that fly over the ocean and grab some of the water. If I understand correctly, a drone hit one of them and took it out of commission.
Oh, God damn it.
And again, I've seen a million drone videos. So, there's helicopters obviously from the news, whatever. Like, there are people trying to capture footage, like all this stuff. So, like, again, I don't know what's true, what's not true, whatever. But I do think that as more of those accidents, and I'd clarify it as an accident right now, happen, I think more and more people are going to ask themselves, well, was it one of our adversaries or was it just
right.
somebody taking photos, because they wanted to go viral online. And so I did.
And it could have been the latter, whereas the former, people are going, "Hey, we could do that too."
Of course.
So if they didn't learn from that story, they sure as hell have it now.
So that type of stuff, I think, is, frankly, makes things much, much more complex than maybe we thought. Another thing that's happened since we talked last year that I thought was pretty noteworthy is the rise of prediction markets. And those seem to be, one, much more accurate than people thought. And two, they seem to be drastically.
What's the big one? Polymarket? Polymarket's the big one?
There's two that I pay attention to. So Polymarket is the bigger one, but they're not available in the United States. Kalshi is the one that is available in the United States that I spend most of my time looking at for like domestic based things.
Kalshi, how do you spell Kalshi?
Kalshi.
Okay.
And so I wonder, while everyone has been talking about the creators, the internet people are going to replace the media, is it actually the prediction markets that replace the media? Right? Or maybe they don't replace, but they augment in a way that the media can't.
Well, then the question becomes is how much money does it take to rig the prediction? So we know, for example, the you had to be brain dead to not realize that polls are worthless, right? The political polls are worthless, just like they're about as valuable as fact checkers, right? And as I said in my year in review, when I have a discussion with someone and they say, well, I Googled it and you're wrong. And I'm going, how many fucking deep state fact checkers did you have to read to come to that conclusion, right? How much money would it take to rig the poly markets?
I think it is much harder than people think.
Okay. I don't know how big the money is. Know how big the money is.
There are, I'll give you a good example. How much money do you think is being bet on Kalshi for the temperature tomorrow in New York City?
Oh my God. I don't know. I would think it would be tiny, but go ahead.
I looked yesterday. It's like $28 million.
Wow. That's irrelevant too, right? That's just people who are just betting.
One city trying to pick what is the highest temperature of the day. $28 million wagered.
So
there's a lot of cities in America.
Now, why would you do that? And let me ask you this: why would you bet that? I've always wondered why you couldn't get rich sports betting, because all you have to be is better than average, right?
Well, there's I forget the name of the book, but Billy Walters is considered the best sports bettor of all time. He wrote a book. You should read it. It's fascinating because he pretty much. What's it called? His name is Billy Walters. So you just search Billy Walters book, it'll come up. Okay. But he basically tells, here's how I did it. And he was a quant hedge fund before quant hedge funds, right? They were crunching the data, right. They built all the technology, whatever. And then actually part of the difficulty, according to him, is how do you put the bets in? If you're a hedge fund, you just go, you buy the stock and you're right or you're wrong.
Yeah, right. So there was no market.
With the betting. Well, he's just like, we had people all around the country that literally were calling him and saying, okay, go bet, bet $300,000 on horse 6, go. Right. They walk up to the counter and they would do it. And so you read the book and it's a lot about risk and kind of all that. But it's fascinating when you start
There was someone who went to a casino and monitored their roulette wheel, maybe, and they figured out which one, because of how it was sitting on the floor or whatever, had a bias built into it.
Well,
they're not perfectly unbiased because it would require perfect symmetry.
Well, there's two different stories I've heard. The one that I know, Ed Thorpe obviously beat blackjack by counting cards, and then I believe with the roulette wheel. If I remember correctly, I think he put something in his shoe that was like a timer, and he somehow figured it out. And then I can't remember if it's Billy Walters or somebody else that they took the roulette wheels, found where they were made, ordered them, brought them, to like
and then
warehouse.
Analyzed them. And
they analyzed and realized that there was some something was going on with the wheel, and they had again 1% edge. Whatever the thing was.
That's all you need. That's all you need.
But he put $100 million through it. That's all you needed, right?
Yeah, you got to put a lot of small bets and just keep banging away on it.
Correct.
I, by the way, also read at your advice, Witness to a Prosecution.
What'd you think?
Yeah, today's a good day to talk about it because today we're about to be a witness to a prosecution, right? I don't even know what Mershon did, but as you know, it was about Michael Milken and the prosecution of him, and you don't know if it's all true because it was written by a friend,
his lawyer,
but you can't friend/lawyer, but you can't help but say, boy, that really is yet again what happens when the long arm of the state, capital S, decides they're going to get you. And it's a horrifying tale. And if the state decides they're going to hurt you, they're going to hurt you. And the laws don't matter, that nothing matters. They are going to get you.
Do you want to know what the Trump sentence is live?
I do want to know.
Donald Trump was not punished for his criminal conviction in the hush money case. The New York judge declined to sentence the president-elect to prison time or impose fines after a jury found him guilty of 34 felony counts. And then, depending on who you read, a number of people say at some point he said something about, quote, cement his status as a convicted felon.
That'll be overturned at some point. But the key was today. They'll be arguing for years in the court about whether that should be all thrown out. But as I said, I think it was before we started filming, but as I said to you, what I would have liked to have seen is 4 years of community service.
Yeah. Well, he got sentenced to nothing. There's no penalty. There's no fine.
4 years of community service has humor quality to it.
No,
right?
Of course. He's going to go do 4 years of community service. He's going to serve in the White House.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. That's why I thought Mershon could actually contribute in an amazingly positive way by saying something about lawfare, some political comment about saying, look, this just is not a direction we should go. Now, he was a douchebag, I think, during the trial, so I wasn't expecting it. I was just hoping he might. Maybe he did. Maybe he did. And we'll read about it later today on Zero Hedge.
Before I let you go, can you give us a quick, we've only got about 2 minutes or so, but can you give us a quick overview? What's your portfolio looking like entering 2025?
What doesn't change much. My portfolio changes in decade cycles. So I'm not a trader. I'm really not a stock picker either. So I try to get big picture ideas right. It's like a little Peter Lynch in the sense that he spotted a trick with regional banks, and so he bought the shares of 128 regional banks, right? And so I try to predict sort of big swings. And right now, I'm my largest position is variance of cash, 2-year Treasury flavor, short duration, and return about 4 or 5% sort of thing. And my next biggest position is gold, and gold's probably 27%. I think, and then a smattering of other things. I believe when the selling starts, all boats sink, right? Everything gets sold when you get into one of these sort of disinflationary sell-offs. And I think you want to be way out of the splash zone. So I think you could own a stock that has a P of 10 and a dividend yield of 3%. And that PE can go to 5. And my prediction is based on our discussion of monetary policy and how I think we could be at the end of a 5-decade cycle. I believe the age of the V bounce may be over. I think the V bounces were a consequence of this excessive monetary policy because there's always dip buyers. There's always dip buyers. And I think the best model, even though models never work in this game, the best model would be the Nikkei. That it gets knocked down, it tries to get up, gets knocked down. I think the investor will have his soul ripped out sort of one piece at a time over a long period of time. And I'm hoping that will be offered buying opportunities. And I don't worry about 2-year treasuries, for example. So, because I don't think if there's an opportunity to buy cheap in 6 months, it's a good one. I think it'll be like the 29 crash, and it's now 1930, and you think you're bargain hunting, and you're not. And so 2-year treasuries are good for me because they make me think for 2 years before I do something. If I had to go long something right now, I think I'd go long platinum. It's been dead money for a long time. I think the EV story's bullshit. It turns out there's a lot of platinum inside hybrids. I think the pure EV story's got a long ways to go. And I think the death of the internal combustion engine is premature. And so platinum, I think, could make a run. It's the only metal on the planet that hasn't done but I haven't done it yet. Just for the record, I'm waiting for something to say, okay, now's the time to move. I'm hoping in the next 5 years. In 2009, I made the mistake. I was positive there was another halving left. We were at historical average valuation at the bottom. You don't crush everything the way we did and stop at the historical average unless the central bankers put $30 trillion in. And that's the part I didn't see coming. We had another halving in us if they had let the system run. Mm-hmm. And if I'm right that they can't do it again because they're now boxed in by inflation. The mistake I made was not asking the question, okay, we're at fair value. You've got another halving, but how much should you own at fair value? I just looked at the halving. Mm-hmm. And so I bought a couple tobacco stocks, but nothing of consequence. This time, I think I will sort of ask the question, what should you own at the various stages? And try to adjust a little more in analog fashion, my exposure to the different asset classes. And so what I'll do is make new mistakes this time. But if we do a 20% correction, 20% doesn't correct anything. To call it a correction bothers me. If you go down 20% and then come back in a year, the word correct implies, if you look it up in Merriam-Webster, it implies that you fixed something, right? You didn't fix anything. If you go right back up. And so to correct, we got to drop 50% off this market. And if you want to say, no, we won't do that, then say, okay, so your cash flow is going to be half the norm. And that's going to suck balls too. Right? So if you want to fly around in the stratosphere, fine, but your cash flow is going to suck. And you can't keep growing and growing and growing. It just, there's nothing in the history of markets that says that's sustainable. There's nothing in the history of markets that says I can predict when it'll stop. But it will stop, in my opinion. And I don't want to be near it when it does.
That's fair. Where can we send people to find you on the internet?
Well, on the internet at David B. Collum in real time. I'm under my desk half the day. David B. Collum on Twitter. My year in review is my pinned tweet. As I told you, I was talking to a private equity guy who I'd harassed to no end, said, you guys should all burn in hell. I mean, I was really rough on the guy. And then we chatted, and I said, start reading it. I said, when you get bored, stop reading it. Right? And I said, if you maintain your interest, it's 250 pages. Keep reading. He was a young guy, so he had some learning to do. It was clear that he was a prairie dogger in a cubicle somewhere, trying to get me to give him money so that he could get rich and I could get poor.
David B. Collum on Twitter, 2024 year in review. What is a fact? There's a hell of a lot of information here. I appreciate it very much, and we'll do it again in the future.